Friends, peace be with you. In this lecture, I shall focus on Palestine and the global system. The main thesis of my presentation would be that the global system has failed Palestine. It's something that happened right from the beginning, and there seems to be no sign that things will change in the near future. Not many people are aware that right from the beginning, the global system, especially the United Nations, had failed the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Why do I say this? The United Nations helped to create Israel in 1948. The creation of Israel was an injustice in itself, given the factors that led to the creation of Israel. Israel was not the product of the yearning of the people of Palestine, West Asia. It was not the product of the yearning of the Jews of Palestine for a nation state. They were not central to this quest for a nation state. Israel was the product of Europe's crisis. What does one mean by this? That if you look at the way in which Israel was created, there were a number of factors, but perhaps among the main factors were, one, a desire amongst the Jews of Eastern Europe, mainly Eastern Europe, who wanted a Jewish state, an exclusive Jewish state, and that had been developing for a while, this desire for an exclusive Jewish state amongst East European Jews. The idea was that only an exclusive Jewish state could protect the Jewish people, mainly because of what had been happening in various parts of Europe to the Jews. We know this, that the Jews had been subjected to discrimination, they were marginalized, they were the victims of a long, long period of injustice, the Jews of Europe. Things improved somewhat for the Jews of Western Europe, but in Eastern Europe, things were still bad. And this is why they felt that they needed a state in order to protect their interests. We also know that the State of Israel was the product of a religious phenomenon called Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism was not mainstream Christianity. Its legitimacy was questioned by a lot of Christians themselves at that time, this ideology called Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism also wanted a Jewish state. They wanted a Jewish state in order to protect the interests of the Jews, but also they felt that it was linked to Christianity in the sense that you had to have a Jewish state, an exclusive Jewish state, to usher in the second coming of Christ. That was teaching within this particular interpretation of Christianity. But it was never mainstream Christianity. It was largely, again, a product of Christian groups here and there, a number of them in Britain and in other places. They felt that this was legitimate. It was something that was required in the religion itself to create an exclusive Jewish state. So this was Christian Zionism, which had very little legitimacy within Christianity itself. That's the second force. But the third force, in the end, perhaps the most effective, was the push for a Jewish state by Western colonialism, especially British colonialism at that time. British colonialism felt that there was this need for a Jewish state. It was actually linked to their colonial agenda. They saw a state, exclusive Jewish state, in the form of Israel, as a way of preserving colonial interests in that region, meaning by which in West Asia. That if there was this exclusive Jewish state called Israel, Western colonialism would be able to perpetuate its interests through this exclusive state. And they become very concerned about this for a variety of reasons. They knew by that time, the 19th century, why a critical role for the imperial powers was vital in that region. It was the only region in the world where three continents met, strategically very important in terms of the strategic routes, the Suez, the Mediterranean. It was all part of the region. And they saw the state that would serve their interests, the interests of the colonial powers, because location and geography have always been very, very important to colonialism, to any imperial project. So they wanted a Jewish state in the form of Israel. They also wanted such a state because by that time, the mid-late 19th century, there was some awareness among the colonial powers of the importance of oil. And oil had become an issue already at that time. So the colonial powers wanted to have a tight grip over the region. They could not depend upon the Arab countries, even though many of them were under colonial rule and they were very subservient to colonial power. But nonetheless, Britain, for instance, was not very convinced that this was enough to ensure their dominance in the region. They needed something else that would be a greater guarantee of colonial interest in the region, and they felt that by creating this state, helping to create a Jewish state, they would have the support of the Jewish people and of other interests that also committed to this idea of an exclusive Jewish state. So colonialism played a very big role, which is why, as all of us know, the idea of exclusive Jewish state in terms of international relations was mentioned in the famous Balfour Declaration, the letter written by the British Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour at that time to the head of the Jews in Europe, Rothschild, and there he mentioned this idea of an exclusive home for the Jews in West Asia. It fitted in with the typical colonial policy of divide and rule because the British knew that there was already a Palestinian land, perhaps not a state in the Westphalian sense, but a Palestinian land existed and it was lived by not just Jews, but Christians and Muslims. That was the reality. And yet they wanted an exclusive Jewish state which could only divide the people and contribute to friction amongst the communities. They were aware of that. But they pushed for this because it is something which the colonialists have always done. Whenever you have mixed communities, they pursue this policy of divide and rule. So these were the forces that were behind the creation of an exclusive Jewish state, of the state we call Israel. The Jews of Palestine, as I said earlier, they did not have much of a role in this idea and in the pursuit of this idea. But because colonialism was strong at that time and because it had control over that region, they were able to push for this idea. They used the United Nations, which was, in a sense, at the behest of Western powers at that time. It's a long time ago, at the beginning of the creation of the United Nations, which was in 1945. And yes, they felt that one had to have a Jewish state. It violated the very principles of the United Nations because there was no plebiscite, no attempt to find the feelings of the people, to establish how the people felt, because Palestine, as an entity, the majority of the Palestinians were Arabs at that time, and Arabs who were either Muslim or Christian. The Jews were a very small percentage of the population at that time, and I'm including the Jews who were part of Palestine, who had nothing to do with this project, but nonetheless, As a community, they were there. They constituted about 10% of the population. But there was this push for an exclusive Jewish state, which suited the interests of the colonialists, Britain in particular. At that time, the United States was not that prominent as a colonial power. And it was what East European Jews, the majority of whom were Zionists at that time, they wanted that. And of course, this ideological Christian Zionism. And so Israel was created. And even its establishment, there was an injustice, which again goes to show how the global system had failed Palestine. The majority of the population, as I said, was non-Jewish. 60% of the population, at the very least, was made up of Muslims and Christians. But they pushed for this exclusive Jewish state. And it was not just the demographic factor. If you look at the whole region, the Jewish population, there were Jews living in Iraq, in Iran, in Syria, in Lebanon, and other places, but they were a small minority. But all these forces behind the creation of Israel, they wanted Israel. So Israel was created in violation of the United Nations Charter, in violation of the concept of plebiscite, finding out what the people wanted, which was the UN principle. So it's not just the manner in which it was set up and the way in which it went against common sense, demographics, it went against the UN Charter and all the rest of it. We should also take into account, and this is very important, that by creating the State of Israel through the United Nations, yes, it was a legitimate act in the sense that it was done through a vote and all the rest of it. We know that. And those who were behind this, they realized what they were doing. It was not as if there wasn't an awareness of what this would lead to. But since there were larger interests at stake, they went ahead to create this Jewish state. And as expected, this is another very important factor, it led to a pogrom. Something like 870,000 Palestinians, mainly Muslims, but also quite a lot of Christians, they were expelled. There were also Palestinians who were jailed, imprisoned, and tortured. There were quite a lot of Palestinians who were also killed in the process of creating this exclusive Jewish state. But the main thing was the pogrom, the expulsion that took place, which was massive. It was 1948-49 itself that this pogrom took place. So right from the beginning, all